To Watchman on the Pod. We are going to continue in The Black Pope, A History of the Jesuits by M.F. Cusack. She was the nun of Kinmar. We're in chapter 13. The Jesuit in the Confessional, the heading. The Jesuit in the Confessional, the flogging mania of the Middle Ages, the Confessional. The Romanist is followed by the confessor from the cradle to the grave. Every subject is discussed and decided there. All the affairs of life controlled, children terrified, hell open to Christians, books to terrify children, a man-made religion, how Rome influences Protestants. It is a system of organized and deliberate deceit. How the Jesuits make confession easy. Cardinal Manning afraid of the Jesuits denounced for their immoral teaching by the French Roman Catholic clergy again and again. Denounced for practicing idolatry by the Romanist bishops, caught in their own trap. Denounced for interfering in politics. The flogging mania of the Middle Ages. How the Jesuits were concerned in it. Catherine de' Medici practiced it on her court ladies. Cruelties and immoralities, the result. There is no subject of such importance as that of which we are about to treat. The Roman Catholic Church, everyone, from the trembling child to the aged and feeble man and woman, is obliged to confess if he hopes for eternal salvation. What a terrible bondage. What an awful crime. And all this must be done and suffered at the dictates of a church which, after all, has confessed herself very doubtful if her priests really possess the orders without which they cannot absolve. Enough has been said on that subject, but it is of such grave importance that we would ask the reader again to glance at the pages in which the question is discussed. If all this pain, if all this shame, if all this agony has to be endured for nothing, what shall be said of those who inflict it? And they know, as few of their penitents know, that the probabilities are against them. It is no wonder that Rome discourages investigation and silences thought as a deadly crime. No wonder that she falsifies history, that she dreads honest biography, that she dares not be true. Truth would be her death blow, but for us, shall we submit to her commands and bow before her dicta? Shall we do all that in us lies, as so many are doing at the present day, to support such a system? Or shall we do all that in us lies to defeat it? The moral, or rather the immoral teaching of the confessional has been a subject of much of much discussion, and perhaps has had more exposure than any other subject connected with the Church of Rome. This system is necessary for Rome, and it is one of the notes against her that it should be so. Perhaps only those who have had a large experience of the system can understand all its evils. It is obviously true that there must be a serious moral contamination to both the priest and the penitent, but this is by no means the only evil. One important point has been somewhat overlooked by those who have treated it. That point is the question of direction. This touches every affair of life and is the real source of the power of the Church of Rome. We commence, however, with the question of confession as far as it is merely the confession of sin. And first, in order to understand the power of Rome in this and all else, we must try to realize the fact that Roman Catholics believe in the power of the priest to forgive sin as truly and absolutely as we believe in the power of Christ. We must remember that from the very dawn of reason, the Roman Catholic child is taught to look on the priest practically as a God whose word is absolute, whose power is divine. The confessional is repulsive to every Catholic, not because it is always a source of evil of a certain kind, but because human nature shrinks from exposing its faults and foibles to any human creature. Hence, it has been necessary to make the confessional a source of absolute obligation under the most terrible penalties. Better, Christ the priest, to be ashamed here than to be ashamed for all eternity. Hence it is that priests insist on the child going to confession at the very earliest age possible. No child, they say, is too young to be damned, and horrible stories are told to children frightening them on this subject. So no child is too young to go to confession. The chain is wound around the soul at such an early age that its power is not realized, and in some cases at least, the chain is never broken. A book called Hell Open to Christians was published in Ireland some years ago, but was withdrawn from circulation for a time at least in consequence of the exposure of its horrible teaching by Protestants. The tortures which even children of 7 years of age endured in hell because they would not go to confession were described with all the realism of Dante. In the examination of conscience, etc., by Lingori, we read, "Tell me, my sister, if punishment of not confessing a certain sin, you are to be burnt alive in a cauldron of boiling pitch, and if after that your sin was to be revealed to all your relatives and neighbors, would you conceal it? You certainly would not conceal it if you knew that by confessing it, your sin would remain secret and that you should escape being burnt alive. Now it is more than certain that unless you confess that sin, you shall have to burn in hell for all eternity, and on the day of judgment it shall be made known to the whole human race." How far all this man-made religion is from the pure gospel of Christ, we need not say. The eternal God cannot be unjust, and it would be a ghastly injustice when the penalty of sin has been once paid for all in blood to exact it again. This is one of the many things which makes the system of Rome so derogatory to the majesty of heaven. But the power which the confessional places in the hands of the church is almost inconceivable. Rome claims the right to decide on every question of family relationship, on every event in life, on every change of state, on every political and social matter. Rome rules with a vengeance terrible to its subjects and beyond compare danger to every human being who can be reached by her influence. She forbids all intercourse with heretics where and when she dare. She regulates all intercourse with heretics where she cannot forbid it. Which is the more dangerous to the public peace, it would be difficult to say. Intercourse even at the present day and in this free country is absolutely and sternly forbidden with those who have left the church. A word of explanation might be said, a question might be asked that would arouse a doubt, hence there must be no possibility of such a danger. How weak the Church of Rome is with all her boasted strength. The weakest saint can face all the world with Christ, but Rome is afraid of the poorest child if that child has been taught a pure religion and can read the Bible. So far-reaching is the influence and power of Rome today, even in England, that we have known Protestants who have declined any social intercourse with those who have left the Church of Rome because it might offend their Roman Catholic friends. Thus, Rome obtains added strength from those who, if they were asked solemnly, do they desire to see the fires of Smithfield relit, would declare they could not imagine such an event possible. Yet Rome has declared openly and plainly that she does desire such a consummation. There is one of many points to be noted about the confessional, and that is that it is a system of deliberate deceit. Apart from the consideration of a certain class of moral evil, on which we do not propose to touch here more than briefly, there is the question of deliberate deceit, and in this matter, the Jesuits are the chief offenders. The object of the Jesuits has been to attract to the confessional by making confession easy, and this has been done in two ways. First, confession has been made easy by giving the lightest possible penance for even grievous sins, and by having a moral code which make the most grievous sin appear as mere bagatelle. The Jesuit books published with authority for the use of confessors prove this beyond question, and it is indeed lamentable that English gentlemen who, one, prided themselves on being honorable men would stoop so low as to make such works the guide of their conscience and of the consciences of others. It is a sad day for old England that even one English clergyman should have learned from an apostate church to teach falsehood and practice treachery. But it is worthy of a special note that while the Jesuit makes it easy for a servant to rob his master or for a youth to commit sin, he has a very different code of morals and truth where the church is concerned. It is a deadly crime to deceive the church. It is a deadly crime to conceal a sin or even a failing from the priest. Who authorized this double code of morals? Certainly not Scripture. Even the natural law of the heathen revolts against such double dealing. When writing of the suppression of the Jesuits by many nations who have revolted against their code of morals, we shall enter more fully into this subject. For the present, we must limit ourselves to giving some extracts from the books which they have published. We have already shown that they teach disloyalty. The only loyalty which they allow to be practiced is loyalty to the Pope, and even that is subjected to the will of the general of the order. With all other authority, they are openly secretly at war. And this is what makes the Jesuit so dangerous to the state or country where it lives. And this is the reason why he has been expelled from so many Roman Catholic countries. In the remarkable life of Cardinal Manning, amongst so much that is noteworthy, there is nothing more so than the determined hand with which he kept down the Jesuits and the fear which his otherwise outspoken biographer had of giving them the least offense. They rule by fear, but a day comes when men rise up against their excessive tyranny and cast them out. History repeats itself. What the continental bishops of the 16th and 17th century did for the protection of the church and their people must be done in the 19th century. In 1614, the French Parliament examined the treatise of the famous Jesuit Franz Suarez, published at Cambrai in 1613, Permissu Supremiorum. The Arrêt du Parlement described it as tending to the subversion of states and to induce the subjects of kings and sovereign princes to make attempts on their sacred persons, and ordered it to be burnt by the public executioner. It contains such propositions as these: that the Pope has power to dispose heretical and obstinate kings is one of the dogmas of the faith which has been retained and believed. An excommunicated king may with impunity be killed by anyone. Hush. Servine, in one of his addresses to the Parliament, enumerates as holding the same opinions on these subjects with Suarez the names of Bellarmine, Gretzer, Beacon, Azarias, Bonarquis, Richaume, Keller, Lessas, and Vasquez, all of them Jesuits of note, to whom may be added Emmanuel, Saw, Delaris, and Tanner. So highly, however, did Pope Paul V approve of the work that in September 1614 he communicated to Suarez his approbation of its content. The volume was reissued in 1619 and again in 1655, thus demonstrating that the brief alleged to have been issued by Aquaviva prohibiting all discussion by members of the company on the two objectionable propositions noticed above was written. As the Jesuit historian Japhanius inmates solely to allay, is that allay or Allah? Allay, the unpleasant controversy awakened in France and was not intended to be a general instruction. It was simply a deception and a snare, and is, as is remarked by Mr. Cartwright, who brought it to light, an illustration of the equivocation practiced by the order in its corporate capacity. In 1652, the Jesuit Santorial taught that the Pope can dispose kings not only for heresy, schism, and the like, but also for personal iniquity and uselessness, that he can dispose the emperor and give his empire to another if he does not defend the church. that as St. Peter was given the power of punishing with temporal punishment and even with death certain persons for the correction and example of others, so to the church and chief pastor is given the power of punishing with temporal punishments princes, transgressors of divine and human laws, especially if the crime was heresy. In 1665 and 1666, Alexander VII. In 1679, Innocent XI. And in 1690, Alexander VIII. Successively condemned a large number of immoral propositions advanced by Jesuit writers, but they left altogether uncensored the maxims inculcating sedition, treason, and assassination, also contained in the works of the same authors. On the 1st of January, 1631, the Archbishop of Paris published his condemnation of some propositions from Ireland and 2 English books, the one by Edward Knott, whose real name is Matthias Wilson, vice provincial of the Jesuits in England, and the other by John Floyd, Jesuit, under the false name of Daniel A. Jesu. On the 10th of February, 1631, a circular subscribed by the Archbishop of Paris and 34 bishops then in Paris was sent to all the archbishops and bishops of France, declaring their condemnation of the same books as maintaining many schismatical and blasphemous maxims, which are most injurious to the sacrament of confirmation and violate the authority of the sovereign pontiff. On the 1st of April, 1641, the University of Paris condemned La Somme des Péchés, written by Etienne Bonny, professor of moral theology at Clermont, the Jesuit college, and published by him at Paris in 1639, with the approbation of the provincial of the company. This sentence was soon after endorsed on the 12th of April, 1642, by an assembly of clergy held at Mantes by the Archbishop of Toulouse, in which it was resolved with one common voice that the books of Father Bonny led souls to profligacy, corrupt good morals, violate natural equity and the law of nations, an excuse as light sins, blasphemies, usuries, simonies, and several other sins more erroneous. On the 18th of February, 1655, the Archbishop of Malines published an order forbidding the faithful of his diocese to read the books of the Jesuit Caramel, afterwards immortalized by Pascal in the Providential Letters. The parish priest of Rouen about this time found it necessary for the sake of Christianity to attempt to stem the increasing tide of Jesuit immoral teaching. On the 28th of August and on the 26th of October in the year 1656, they addressed a memorial to the Archbishop of Rouen, signed by 28 of their number, complaining of the immoral doctrines taught publicly by the Jesuit fathers Bonny, Heroux, Caussin, Brissacier, Du Bois, Berard, and La Berie. On the 14th of November in the same year, the parish priest of Paris presented 71 propositions extracted from the published writings of Caramel, Mascarenhas, Escobar, and on the 24th of November, they laid before the General Assembly the clergy of France a remonstrance, from which we extract the following. Will not the church, I think that's Monsignors, disavow these rash men? Will she not testify publicly her heartfelt horror of them? Shall it be said that to be a Catholic, a man must approve domestic robbery with Bonny, simony with Valentia, homicide to avoid a blow with Lessius, assassination for slander with Father Lamy, imposture and false accusations with Caramel, that he must receive all the pernicious or extravagant decisions of Escobar as mysteries revealed by Jesus Christ, and that one is not to complain of them without being treated as a heretic. In 1665, the Faculty of Theology at Paris reported of a book published under the name of Amadeus Guimenius by Matthew Moya, a Spanish Jesuit confessor to the Queen Mother of Spain, that respect for decency prevented them from noticing the abominations which it contained on the subject of chastity. Nor can it be said that these heresy charges against the Jesuits are mere Protestant calumnies. They are simply Roman Catholic facts. It is noteworthy also that English priests have again and again protested against the interference of the Jesuits in political affairs, have declared in plain and emphatic language that they would have enjoyed perfect religious freedom in England if the Jesuits had not tried persistently to stir up strife. The great Roman Catholic historian De Thou has given the substance of a very important document, which appears to have been suppressed not long after its publication. It is a memorial presented to the reigning pontiff Clement VIII by English Roman Catholic priests, remonstrating against the conduct of Jesuits in England. In it, they represented that before the arrival of the Jesuits in England, there had been profound peace and harmony among the Catholics. That up to that time, charges of treason were unheard of, that capital laws against the Anglican priests and those who harbored them were not yet published, that the Jesuits, when they joined them as associates, though few in number, had swooped upon the labors of many years and without toil had reaped what others had sown. That afterwards, when they perceived the danger to which the Catholics were exposed by their own conduct, they had quickly made off and, deserting the warfare of God, had betaken themselves to countries beyond the seas, away from the heat and dust of the conflict. And there, instead of being men devoted to religion, had become the vendors of kingdoms, and assailed chief magistrates in the bitterest terms, had disseminated letters had disseminated letters about invading the kingdom with a foreign army, though it was forbidden by capital laws, had written and published volumes about the controverted succession to the throne, that the result was that Catholics were dragged before the judgment seat, rarely were questioned about religion, always about the state, and almost everything said and done by the Jesuit fathers about the civil government was turned to ruin of the accused. That in their seminaries, their sole object was to entice into the society any youth endowed with particular talent, that hence arose complaints and rivalries, since the pupils ever became divested of the old patriotic spirit, or were harassed by the Jesuits in divers ways for refusing to join them. The Cardinal Borromeo of holy memory had perceived their mode of angling and, disliking their ambition, had deprived them of the care of seminaries in the Diocese of Milan and committed it to the secular priests. That while they had sway in the Anglican Church, a wretched dole was grudgingly distributed among the needy and the prisoners, while the Jesuits themselves lived profusely, so that it became a proverb that the Jesuits were distinguished by the vow of poverty, but the Catholic priests by poverty itself. That Catholics had suffered much in England from the time of Henry VIII, but never had they been beset by a heavier calamity than by this last conflict. One William Watson, educated at Rheims, ordained a priest and sent on the mission to England in 1586 and executed in 1603 for sharing in Raleigh's mysterious plot, into which, according to the report mentioned by Dodd, the Jesuits had I don't know what that word is, guys. I honestly don't. It's INVEIGLED. I can't say it. I don't know what that is. Him, in order to get rid of troublesome enemy in his important considerations by the secular priest, printed AD 1601. It says, whilst the said invasion, Spaniards' invasion planned by Parsons, was thus talked of and in preparation in Spain, a shorter course was thought of if it might have success. Mr. Heskett was set on by the Jesuits in 1592 or thereabouts, which Father Parsons consent or knowledge to have stirred up the Earl of Derby to rebellion against her Highness. Not long after, good Father Holt and others with him persuaded an Irishman, one Patrick Colleen, as he himself confessed, to attempt the laying of his violent and villainous hands upon her Majesty. Shortly after, in the year 1593, that notable stratagem was plotted. The whole state knoweth by whom. For Dr. Lopez, the queen's physician, to have poisoned her, for the which he was executed the year after. But we must turn again to Father Parsons, whose turnings and doublings are such as would trouble a right good hound to trace him. Thirdly, we desire you by the mercies of God to take heed of the novelties and Jesuitism, for it is nothing but treachery, ambition, and a very vizard of most deep hypocrisy. When other kingdoms begin to loathe them, why should you so far debase yourselves as to admire them? At the end of the pamphlet, after enumerating the designments of the popes Pius V, Gregory the 13th, and Sixtus V of the King of Spain, of the Jesuits, especially Cardinal Allen and Parsons, also against the crown and person of Elizabeth, he makes this memorable admission. If we at home, all of us, both priests and people, had possessed our souls in meekness and humility, honored her majesty, borne with the infirmities of the state, suffered all things, and dealt as true Catholic priests, if all of us, we say, had thus done, most assuredly the state would have loved us, or at least borne with us. Where there is no Catholic, there would have been 10. There had been no speeches amongst us of racks and tortures, nor any cause to have used them, for none were ever vexed that way, for simply that he was either priest or Catholic, but because they were suspected to have had their hands in some of the said most traitorous designments. How many of the murders and how many of the agrarian outrages which have disgraced Ireland and reflected on the government of England, which has never dared to put them down with a stern hand, may be traced to the influence of Jesuit theology. When it is taught that it is not murder, in fact, that it is not sin to remove tyrants, what is to prevent men who have been worked up to crime from committing it? And it is remarkable that no pope has ever denounced crime in Ireland, though many popes have specifically and openly encouraged it. The exposure of the teaching of the Jesuits in the confessional by Pascal in his famous provincial letters is well known to the historian. Pascal lived and died a Romanist and devoted to his church, which he wished to save from a system which struck at the roots of all morality. But the public read of such incidents. Shh, shh, hush. They must see a deer or something outside. Okay. But the public read of such incidents in the history of the past with a cold indifference, which contrasts strangely with the burning eagerness with which the controversy was pursued in the beginning. We have already related an incident in which a Jesuit father was caught in his own trap. Another example of this retribution is given by Pascal as having happened in his time. Nor could this be an invention of an enemy, for the names, dates, and places are all given, and any discrepancy of statement would have been at once detected. A certain John D. Alba was servant in the Jesuit College of Claremont. Not being satisfied with the wages which he received, he stole some articles belonging to the fathers. Guys, hush. He had learned from their theology that it was quite justifiable, but it was one thing to steal from seculars and quite another to steal from fathers. The fathers, in a moment of forgetfulness, prosecuted him. When the culprit was brought before the judge, he pleaded the teaching of the Jesuit father and causes Boni. But he pleaded in vain. The judge, M.D. Montarange, declared that the doctrine was contrary to all law, human and divine. Shh, Dakota, hush. That the unhappy man should be flogged before the gates of the college by the common hangman, and that the writings of the Jesuits should be burned publicly at the same time. Such an arrangement, however, would have been too great an exposure for the fathers, so they contrived to stop the prosecution, and the servant escaped. There is evidence, however, that this affair, which was made public property, was one of several reasons which caused the expulsion of the Jesuits. Even in a cursory examination of the doctrines taught by the Jesuits will prove that their system is destructive of all law, human or divine. The continued existence of such a class of men is an amazing and inexplicable fact. But all the reproaches which have been heaped and justly heaped on the Church of Rome pales before the accusations which must be brought against her of supporting and encouraging a system which has been denounced again and again by the best and highest prelates in her own communion, by Catholic princes, and by Catholic people. Nay, even an infallible pope has denounced the Jesuits and the system of the Jesuit as an unendurable evil. The historian Mosheism says there is scarcely any part of the Catholic world which does not offer for our inspection some conflict of the Jesuits with the magistrates, with other orders of monks, or with the bishops and other religious teachers. It is impossible in these pages to give any detail of their conduct in carrying out their missions, but a sufficient estimate of it may be formed from the remarkable letter addressed to Innocent X by Bishop Palafox of Mexico on the 8th of January, 1649. His character was so high that he was selected to occupy the post of viceroy in Mexico, and eventually he was promoted to Bishop of Asma in Spain. He is described by Crescendo Juli, the warm advocate of the Jesuits, as a man full of apostolic gifts, possessing a bright intellect and a heart overflowing with charity. But the Jesuits hated him because he would not allow them to rule his diocese. In self-defense, he is obliged to forward to the Pope a formal remonstrance in which he expressed himself very plainly regarding Jesuit proceedings, not only in his own case, but also in other instances of which he was cognizant. It is from this letter to Pope Innocent X, dated the 8th of January, 1649, that the following passages are cited. What advantages can ministers of state, great lords, and princes derive from the Jesuits, sometimes serving them usefully in their court, when they see monks, under the pretext of internal government of consciences, enter with so much pliability into the secrets of houses, which they thus govern as well as the souls, and thus pass scandalously and perniciously from things spiritual to things political, and from profane things to the most criminal. What other order, after having fallen from its first fervor, has by the citings and examples of some of its professors carried so much laxity into the purity of the ancient morals of the church touching usury, the ecclesiastical precepts, those of the Decalogue, and generally all the rules of Christian life? Thus, young men who have them as masters, being all filled with these maximums, these opinions, this doctrine, and these examples, become not only cowardly and effeminate, removed from all spirituality, and borne on to all the carnal pleasures, but there is even reason to fear that they have all their life an aversion, disgust, and horror for all that is a little painful in the church, and which leads to penitence and a mortification of the cross. What order, most holy Father, since the first foundation of monks and mendicants, has, like the Jesuits, practiced banking in the Church of God, given out money at a profit, and held publicly in their own houses butchers' stalls and other shops for traffic, scandalous and unworthy of a religious order? What order has ever become bankrupt and, to the astonishment and scandal of seculars, filled almost all the world with their commercial dealings, contracts on this by sea and land, and with their subjects? The whole Church of China groans and publicly complains that it has not been instructed but seduced by the instructions given by the Jesuits touching the purity of our belief, that they have deprived it of all ecclesiastical jurisdiction, that they have concealed the cross of the Savior and authorized all heathen customs, that they have rather corrupted than introduce those which are veritably Christian, that in making idolaters become Christian, they have made Christians become idolaters, that they have united God and Belial at the same table, in the same temple, at the same altars, and same sacrifices. And in fine, this nation beholds with inconceivable grief that under the mask of Christianity they revere idols, or bespeak better, that under the mask of paganism they soil the purity of our holy religion. The bishops and ecclesiastics who in the primitive church shed their blood instructing peoples all over the earth, did they practice the methods which the Jesuits used to instruct these neophytes? I wonder what a neophyte is. I don't know. Have all holy order ever instructed the infidels in this way? Have they ever exempted their neophytes from the precepts of mortification or fasting and of the reception of the Holy Eucharist at least once a year? Have they ever permitted the same neophytes not only to go into the temples where idols are worshipped to assist at the abominable sacrifices offered to them, even to sacrifice to them, and thus to soil their souls by so horrible a crime? I am much deceived if the angel of darkness does not rejoice when he beholds in temples raised to his honor not only by his old adorers, but also the baptized, the neophytes, and sometimes those who profess to preach our holy faith, offering with these idolaters sacrifices at his altars, kneeling down and prostrating themselves and giving him incense, thus communicating with them by external acts, which since the apostles' time has never been suffered in the Catholic Church, with whatever pretext they try to cover this idolatry, by which, in directing internally their intention towards a cross which they carry secretly, they offer an external service to the idol of the demon. Whoa. Whoa. All right. Well, that ends that chapter. We got one more chapter, which is the conclusion, and that is chapter 14. Then after that will be the appendix. There's one appendix, two appendix, three appendix, and then that will be, oh, wait a minute. Over here, there's press notes. I don't know what that is, so let me check that out because we might read that too. Press notices, that's what it is. The Truth About Convent Life by Miss M.F. Cusack, late Mother General of the Sisters of Peace. So they're press notices, so we'll probably just read that too, get it all done. I'm not sure if we'll get it done today or not. I can't answer that right now. It's 6:32. So, brothers and sisters, keep your eyes on Jesus. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Deception's everywhere. Get in the Word. I love you all. Bye-bye.